Hi, Misha here, and we recently posted a kind of a 101 Guyer's Bide and variants look at the French MAS MLE 1936 rifle, getting into the 3651 and the CR39 just because. And a couple said, why not do one on the 49 series? So, okay, we'll revisit. We've covered these in the past, but it's been a minute. First up, we have the MAS-44, which was the first truly full production version. Then we have the MAS-49, which was made in greater quantities. It was more of a refinement. And then we have the version that most are familiar with because it was produced by far in the largest numbers, the MAS-49 56, sometimes referred to as the carbine. All of these fire 7.5 by 54 French. They all use a tilting or tipping bolt, and they all use direct gas impingement. France had been experimenting with a self-loading rifle with direct impingement since literally the turn of the 20th century, the INT-B being an early prototype. For World War I, they went to a long-stroke gas piston in the RSC 1917, which I recently just put up a fresh video on. But after the war, they went back to the direct impingement. They had some prototypes. An early one, they started work in the 20s, 30s, but progress was slow. Finally, the 7.5 cartridge was adopted in 1929, then it was refined in 1935. In one of the earliest production or pre-production or prototype models would have been the MAS-38/39. Now these were actually built as the MAS-40 right as the Germans were invading France. So they just started full production than Germans, but none of them really had reached the front lines. Interestingly, during World War II, the Germans checked out the technology behind the MAS-40 because they had captured the Saint Etienne, the MAS factory, but they weren't super interested. They had their own direction, which was a mistake. France had a better rifle. Well, as soon as France was liberated, as soon as the factory was back in French control and had been, since it was kept operational by the Germans, it was pretty easy to, get it back into working order for the French. They introduced this model here, the MAS-44. It was extremely similar to the 40, except the 40 had a fixed magazine, whereas the 44 has a detachable 10-round mag, and it has this interesting kind of clothespin type clip. So the mag catch, all that is actually on the side of the mag, not as part of the rifle. Right there, and it fits into this notch and then snaps on. We have about a 23-inch barrel. We actually have several components carried over from the MAS-36, including a very similar handguard arrangement. We have the same style of spiker bayonet that pulls out and reverses. Same basic style of stacking rod. We have a hooded front sight like you'd see on later production 36s. As for the rear sight, it's a sliding aperture. elevation adjustable. We have a solid machined receiver, right-handed cocking with the last round bolt hold open. It does stay open after the fact. To release, you just pull it back. Pretty typical military trigger. We do have a safety, quite reasonably well placed. Also, when it's safe, you know, because it physically blocks the trigger plus internally. Very similar buttstock to the 36. And a side-mounted sling. Now they only made about 6,100-ish, maybe 6,500 of these for the French Navy. They were mostly produced in 1945, and they did see use after World War II in the late 40s by French forces. It proved to be a very good rifle. This machine receiver, very robust, very durable. Accuracy was acceptable for what it was. The 7.5 cartridge was actually very light shooting, but still powerful enough. A detaching 10-round mag was more than sufficient for that era. But there was room for improvement, which directly led on to the 49. We have the same length barrel. We have the same stacking rod. This one has the fork type. I'm sorry, brain fart, guys. The uncompletely shrouded front sight. That's for use with the grenades. Notice it does not have a bayonet. That's one thing they removed. It does have a grenade launcher here. Has the same kind of worm wheel here for adjusting, like you saw on the sorry, this one's stiff. I always forget that. On the 3651, but whereas the 3651 was for 22mm NATO, these were made initially for the French 48mm rifle grenade. So a little different system. The back is very similar. The rear sight was updated a bit, made a little more adjustable, a little more usable, but it's essentially the same rear sight. A big difference, they started to integrate a scope rail on the 49. With the idea that they would kind of mass issue a basic optic for the infantry. The sight is pretty well the same. Stock is pretty well the same. Mag is only very slightly different. Safety, same. Now there are two versions of this that I will talk about in just a minute. Well, the 49, again, was reliable and durable. It had better effective accuracy because of the new sighting systems. But there was room for improvement. But it took a long time to happen because Uncle Sugar. America gave or loaned France nearly 500,000 M1 carbines and M1 Garands during the 40s and early 50s. This meant that only about 20,000, 21,000 49s were produced. They didn't need them when someone's essentially giving them free guns. Even if they felt, rightly or wrongly, that their gun was better, you know, free is hard to beat. But eventually, as the carbine and Garand became obsolete post-Korean War, France would revisit, refine, and update their design, coming out with the ultimate version here, the 56. This is pretty different, especially in the barrel end. We've gone to a shorter 21-inch barrel, but we've added some length because now we have a muzzle brake. We have a standard 22mm NATO rifle grenade launching system, so like you saw on the 51. See that? New front sight pattern. Of course, we've cut the stock back to here, trying to make it a little more carbine like. Kind of here. Just kind of pull this up and then back down. And this piece here is our gas cutoff. Short handguard. Same detaching 10-round mag as we saw. Same machined receiver. We've again gone to a new pattern of rear sight. This is more squared off, more usable, also more durable. The scope mount is 100% standard now. Same buttstock. Now these have this rubber boot for grenade launching. And also the 56 uses a detaching blade bayonet. Here. Rings go around, so they're getting away from the spiker. And they would make over 200,000 of the 56, and it would see widespread use from the late 50s all the way through the late 70s, early 80s, when it was finally phased out in favor of the FAMAS bullpup. So it was kind of the ultimate culmination, in a way, of a project that dated all the way back to the turn of the century. So that's kind of a brief rundown. As far as collecting and buying, we'll go in reverse order because of commonality. This is the version you're most likely to see. After they were done using them, much like they had done with the 36 rifles, France would refurbish, restore, pretty much make look brand new their fleet of MAS rifles and put them in long-term storage, where they would be bought by Century Arms some years later. Now, aside from a few, and I do mean a few, French 7.62 308 conversions, these were all in 7.5. Essentially, if you find one, it's either in 7.5 or it's in 308, and that conversion was done by Century Arms here in the US of A. Conversions range from okay to not even usable, with a few of them reported not even safe. Essentially what they did to use the slightly shorter cartridge, they took the barrel and they shortened the chamber about a half an inch. Not even quite that much, but you get the idea. So you can easily tell. One thing, they'll be marked. They very crudely took the 7.5 marking and kind of overstamped it to say 7.56 overstamp 2, and the barrel will be a little bit shorter on the NATO ones. But just know that that was a conversion done by Century Arms. Not only is it not going to be as reliable, also value goes way down. Most all you find will be refurbished to one degree or another. That's okay. And yeah, in recent years, these have started to become quite valuable. People are finally kind of giving them recognition, but for a long time, they were just a couple $100. And 7.5 French is still being made, and they're a lot of fun. The direct impingement, they have a very durable firing pin in them. It looks like a giant nail. So you're probably not going to break it. That it does lead me to one thing though. The firing pin is free floating. So with some commercial ammo, slam firing is possible. So if you shoot commercial ammo for the first time, be very careful. As soon as you chamber around, make sure your gun is pointed in the safe direction. Or you can retrofit a firing pin spring to these. That's what some people do. But if you do that, then it may or may not work with older military ammo. So it's your call. But just be aware, SKS kind of suffers from the same thing. These typically, when they were being sold by Century, came with 2 mags or maybe 4, depending on the thing, and a 2-pocket leather pouch each, a sling, a bayonet, a night sight, which goes on the end of the barrel, and of course is long dead, and a neat little accessory kit in kind of a leather pouch that kind of reminds me of an old-fashioned shaving kit pouch. But they came with a lot of goodies, and they were, again, very reasonable priced for a long time. As for the 49, the ones that the French Army had were again refurbished and put into storage and were sold off here. Some would have their grenade launchers removed, others would not. Just kind of depends. So you'll find them with and without grenade launchers. They tend to go for a bit more money because of rarity, especially the French ones. There was another batch that came in that were Syrian contract, and you can easily tell them for 2 simple things. One, the Syrian contract guns retained the pig sticker bayonet, and also they tend to be in, I don't want to say rough condition, but let's say well-used condition, because unlike the French guns, they were never refurbished. So they will have their original finish, but it won't be that complete. What can you do? Also, they often won't have near as nice of a bore because the refurbished guns often have a brand spanking new bore unless some American fired corrosive through it. And serial numbers will not match. It's another thing to point out. Usually on the French imports, serials on the dust cover and receiver will match. But for a lot of reasons, the serial number on the bolt itself, for one thing, it's usually electro-penciled in, doesn't seem to match a lot of the time. And the barrel will sometimes have a number on it, especially with the 56s, but this does not seem to be a serial number. It seems to be more of a batch or lot number. So if you have an otherwise matching gun, but the number on the barrel doesn't match, don't worry, that's not a serial number. Speaking of, these guns also had pretty small and tasteful import marks because they were brought over before Century had to do the big scrawls. So yeah, for the 49s, there's really kind of 3 subvariants. The Syrian contract with bayonet and grenade launcher in used condition, or French Army with or without grenade launcher and no bayonet. And these do command a little more, not a whole lot more, but a little more than the 56s. And the longer barrel is kind of appreciated for some shooters, but on the other hand, it is longer and heavier, so yeah. Now, as for the last one here, the 44, as you can tell with only 6,000 made, it's not a very common gun. The good news is a lot of them survived and were also refurbished and put into storage. A very similar gun to the 49, but definitely more in the collector vein, although no reason you could not shoot one. They typically have barrel dates of 1945. Also, these are more apt to have the original kind of black lacquer paint finish versus the later phosphating Parkerized finish. Just how they were imported and sold. Not a lot to say about these because there's not really any variations to speak of, and they're just not common enough to say value, but they definitely go for more than the 56s when found, at least in good shape. Back in the day, you could get a 56 for 400-ish, and these were going for at least $650. So I would imagine today, at least $1,000, but that's completely a guess. I ended up with this one because the gentleman had cancer, and, well, you know how that goes. He was getting rid of some stuff. So I've had this one a number of years, probably about 10 years. I've had all these quite a long time. I do tell the story of how I got them in my Storytime video. This one, like I said, came from a gentleman with cancer. This one here, actually I just randomly found it at a local gun shop and was really surprised. It was a really bad time for me to buy, but the money was right. He had it priced very fairly and condition was great. And yeah, I couldn't say no. And then my 56, I've had the longest of all of these. This was a local pawn shop find about a little over 15 years ago. It would be closer to 20. But it was just hanging out there, and that was really before French guns were known and had all the gear with it. It had been sitting there for a long time, so eventually I took it, and they were nice, and tossed in about 30 rounds of ammo for free just so I could shoot it. And I'm sure they were happy to see it go. But yeah, I've had this one a good long while. They're really neat guns. Again, technically the 44 served in World War II, or at least theoretically could have. And the 49 and 49-56 served during the 50s when France was in Algeria and Vietnam and other places, so definitely saw service there and whatnot. They're robust, reliable, very soldier-proof. That's how France tends to do their guns. They're not super refined or accurate like Swiss, but they're not crude and clunky like Russian either. And they're not overly complicated like a lot of German guns tend to be. But yeah, that's about it, guys. There's not a lot to be said. Again, since these were refurbished, the condition is usually pretty excellent. So if you see one and a guy's really talking it up about, oh, this is the best condition, oh, it's amazing, yeah, then most of them are. And I'm not saying he's wrong or that's a bad thing, but some guns it's a lot harder to find good conditions of, and other guns, good conditions not as rare as it might be with something else. So the MAS-49 56 is certainly one of those situations. So yeah, most of the variations happen with the long rifles. The carbines are pretty much all standard, and most of the differences have to do with bayonet or not, or grenade launcher, so on and so forth. But it's a neat part of Cold War history. I encourage you to check it out. French guns are quite highly addictive. Well, if you have any questions or comments or want to talk about your own French autoloader, we'd love to do so below. If you could, like, share, and subscribe. And also check out the link to our Patreon page. This is Misha, and Jay and I will catch you very soon next time.